the iPad.
I did it every time it says that, then I give this big goofy smile. That's how it is. Okay, let us pray. Holy God, you are with those we love and have presented before you, and you are with us now. As we open your word this morning, may your word guide our actions as disciples of your kingdom this day and this week. Amen. So a review of last time, Pastor Mike said you had a great time of sharing together, and then I forgot to ask him what you did.
We did know 5,000.
Oh, like lectionary.
Yeah.
Per John 6.
All of them, no.
Wow, ambitious. Okay, so what should I preach on Sunday? We're gonna be doing video of the 5,000 for 5 weeks. This is week 3. So prepare yourself. That's how the lectionary does it. You get them all. You get the whole chapter. And now I'm making you think, like, oh, I don't know. Talking about God's provision, where did you go with that? I mean, what was your takeaway?
His question was, where are you in that story?
Oh.
Which means you think. So you're just an observer. That's what I am too. Some people feel that they are the poor and the hungry
Yeah.
and in need. And some of them are like the disciples. Oh, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
What do you expect us to do? So.
Interesting. Oh, that's a great way to like step into the narrative. Cool. Nobody thought they were Jesus?
I'm sure there was some thinking that,
Good. Oh, that's great. I'm glad. Well, you'll be extra prepared for our Sunday meetings then. Other comments about last week, or are we ready to start our new study? Okay. So what ways do you use to keep in touch with friends and loved ones? This is like our settling in question. We're going to be talking about the power of the gospel. The theme for the next 6 or 7 weeks, I'm not sure exactly how many we'll do, is confident hope. So we're gonna be looking at the book of Romans. There's also a passage from Hebrews. It's mostly epistles that we'll be looking at. So what ways do you use to keep in touch with friends and loved ones?
Mostly texting.
Texting. Carrie is a good texter. Letter writing. Do you still write letters? How many letters do you mail a week, do you think? Yeah.
Maybe 2 at least.
Yeah. That's remarkable. Oh, maybe you go in streaks, Bernice. Maybe you go in streaks. That's great. I write letters too. Is that so old fashioned? Do other people write letters? There's a few of us that write letters?
Occasionally.
Occasionally, yeah. I would say I'm definitely occasional more than anything.
I like to write thank yous after somebody's been there and did something.
Yes, that is like double appreciation almost in my heart too. I find that such a gratifying thing to do. Anything else? Any other creative ways you stay in touch?
Call them up.
Call, you talk on the phone and call people?
I know, we talk to people, texting drives me crazy.
So I'll ask you the same question. How many phone calls do you think you make a day or a week or couple of days plus? I think that's still far above the average now. FaceTime,
And Zoom.
Zoom. Anything else?
That portal thing, is that the same thing that Facebook?
I don't know.
Always comes up on the kids got it for us, and I struggle every time to turn it on. I go, Mom, click that button, you know, we're standing there. Anyway.
And like video conferencing. Are there any other like more, does anybody email? Send letters by email?
Yeah.
My sister's still a big emailer.
Yeah.
That's how she.
Yeah, it depends how many are on the string and how much you have to save.
Yes.
It might be too long, and then, then you go to.
And isn't it's interesting as you learn people's preferred method. So, like this one, you can't do this, you have to send them that, or, I find that like the various methods. I use so many more methods of communicating than I used to. It comes up every once in a while at church, like yesterday, I was getting a phone call about something, but I was already in a Zoom meeting, you know, so it's like, it's hard because people, you might be working really hard, but you're on the other methods, so they can't even, it's a little frustrating that way.
Well, we actually are in person too. We actually go to someone's home now and we,
Right.
we talk in person.
Wow, imagine that.
Yeah.
Sitting face to face. I wonder if we take that less for granted now, do you think?
So,
Do you think we always will, or do you think that will go away? It'll go away. Okay, here's my next question. Who inspires you to be your best? Not do your best. Be your best. So we're talking about being, not necessarily doing. That's my follow-up question.
I'd say our grandkids. Inspire me to be hopefully be a better person and a good role model.
So you're saying I'll be more patient someday.
I'm working on it. I'm finding as I'm getting older, somehow that patience sometimes isn't always there.
That's my excuse too. Do you have somebody in mind? Or a group? It could be a group of people, I suppose, or
could be a book.
could be a book, could be this book. Not thought about that. Okay. Well, these are the themes we're going to be talking about today. And so I have a series of questions we're kind of gonna, this is like the framing for our study. So today is the power of the gospel. The overall theme is confident hope. We're going to be in Romans 1. So if you want to open your Bible, we're not going to start with the salutation stuff. We are going to kind of jump past that and to what I would say is like the opening theme of Romans. So Romans chapter 1, we'll do some reading and then we're going to kind of tackle it in little sections. This is fairly dense theology. We've done this before, long sentences, lots of phrases. We're not going to necessarily drill down and go piece by piece. This is a little more of a survey, but I want you to get some ideas of the things. So here are the questions that I want to ask you. Is the power of God active and effective among the community of believers? Is it active and effective among us? Might we join in praying for the salvation of the world? Do we believe it's possible? Is there such a thing as confident hope? All right. So Romans is the longest epistle Paul writes, and it contains some of the most developed, I would say, theology, discourse, writing of his understanding of the gospel. The authorship of the book is pretty solid. It's never been seriously questioned. Scholars tell us that this letter was dictated to Tertius in Corinth, somewhere around the year 57. So fairly, I would say, early to middle stages of Paul's ministry. The Jews had been expelled from Rome by the Emperor Claudius. And if you remember the movie we watched on Paul, that expulsion made a connection between Paul and Priscilla and Aquila, who told him about the faithfulness of the Romans. There's a little story about that in Acts 18. This, of course, was in the time when Christianity was not yet a separate movement from Judaism. It was more of a sect within it. So the scripture that we'll read is just, like I said, kind of the beginning parts of a greater context. And the verses preceding what we'll read, kind of 1 through 7, the greeting, Paul is tracing Jesus's lineage. I think to David, which, he says connects Jesus to a kingdom forever. But theologically, Paul also says that Jesus is appointed to this role through his resurrection, right? That he's king forever. So knowing that, I think does kind of help us understand the verses that follow. So we're gonna read 8 through 17. And we can read it all as one section, I think. Because like I said, it's long sentences, so I think it's helpful, because it kind of like circles a little bit. Would anybody like to be our reader? Romans 1, 8 through 17.
I can read.
Oh, okay, who would like to read?
Prayer of thanksgiving.
Yes, that's what I have.
First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because the whole world is hearing about your faith. God is my witness that what I say is true. The God whom I serve with all my heart by preaching the good news about his son. God knows that I remember you every time I pray. I ask that God in his goodwill may at last make it possible for me to visit you now. For I want very much to see you in order to share a spiritual blessing with you to make you strong. What I mean is that both you and I will be helped at the same time, you by my faith and I by yours. You must remember, my brothers, that many times I have planned to visit you, but something has always kept me from doing so. I want to win converts among you also, as I have among other Gentiles, for I have an obligation to all peoples, to the civilized and to the savage, to the educated and to the ignorant. So then, I am eager to preach the good news to you also who live in Rome. I have the complete confidence in the gospel. It is God's power to save all those who believe, first the Jews and also the Gentiles. For the gospel reveals how God puts people right with himself. It is through faith from beginning to end. As the scripture says, the person who is put right with God through faith shall live.
And that was Good News Translation, which is very readable, I think. We who have maybe more formal translations will have lots of bigger words like righteousness and things like that. I don't want to say trip us up, but it's less plain speech. So we're going to take this in 3 sections. 8, 9, and 10 will be section 1, 11 through 15 will be section 2, and 16 and 17 will be the last section. So the first section, I think you said your heading said prayer of thanksgiving. Mine does too. So it gives a little thematic intro there. Anybody have something else? Other than prayer?
Paul's longing to visit Rome.
Okay, so it emphasizes the longing piece of that. I think it kind of helps us. It's also just very much, I think 8, 9, and 10 are about affirmation. Like if I were gonna summarize that, this is really the only autobiographical section in the letter to the Romans. And it does express this commitment Paul has that he really wishes to have this particular kind of relationship with the church in Rome. And prayer is mentioned quite a bit. So in verse 8, are the Romans famous, or is Paul just using complimentary hyperbole to get them to do what he wants?
Yeah, how strong is that church?
I don't know. I'm asking you, how do you see that? What do you make of that?
Sounds like it's at least something rather than nothing, but the whole world is hearing about your faith. I think that's exaggerating. Making people feel good.
Sounds very passionate.
He is passionate, right? Not hyperbole. I mean, he's a master rhetorician, so I don't want to say it's false. But I mean, certainly, Emperor Claudius is kicking the Christians out, so they do have some influence, right? There is some there is some question about like how are they going to use their power as they're gaining traction. Whether or not I'm not sure the whole world would know, but I do think the Mediterranean world probably knew. And Rome is a key city, of course. It is still today, but it absolutely was then, the center of the empire. So, even though the first century churches were small in terms of, like numbers, I think there is an awareness that they belong to something greater. And, if there's a faithful congregation in the capital city of the empire, right, that, I would assume if I were out in the hinterlands, that would encourage me, you know, to feel that there's something to this and we're part of a greater cause and there are people like me there and like, you know, there are people like them that are like me and, I don't know, I've never really thought about that before, but I do wonder if that still is in effect today. If you have ever been complimented for your faith, or if your church community has ever been complimented for its faith and its action and something someone has heard about, and you know what effect that affirmation has on an individual or a group of believers. Do you think it does?
Very much. So.
What's the effect? What
We want you to
difference
do
is
more.
You don't wanna prove them wrong.
Yeah. Now you have a reputation to uphold.
It probably gives one more energy, a feeling of, you know, if it's the community of faith that has been, you know, upheld because of the things that they do, the whole community of faith might feel stronger together.
Yeah. I feel like there's so much power in noticing and, you know, you talked earlier about writing thank yous. Just simple acknowledgement of like something that has occurred. Yeah, because, you know, this ministry that we engage in is, I mean, it's pretty intangible in certain ways, right? So, if people notice, if it makes a difference and they tell you that, I mean, it certainly has that effect on me. I want to do more. I have a reputation to uphold, but more than that, I think it is that, oh my gosh, I'm actually making a difference? Oh, I didn't know if I was or not. Now I know that this did, and you know, I want to do it again, or I want to keep going on it. Do you have that feeling? Do you think about that? Do you receive words of affirmation? Do you give them? Do you, you know, I wonder about that.
I feel like I got more stress after that because you're trying to keep doing.
So sometimes it feels like a burden when someone affirms.
It can.
Yeah. I wonder if we could follow up with that, and so let me invite you to help me. Adam, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, since we moved in up in our town, and I hear quite a bit that, they're thankful that Judy and I have moved in there, that we got a more positive attitude. They don't see us grumpy and Judy's involved with a lot of stuff up there and they said that we've been such a blessing. I
That's
think
100% true, I'm sure.
I think that's because of our faith and that, you know,
Yes.
do things.
And the power of, so what you're talking about is not even necessarily action, but demeanor, right? Just your general demeanor can make a huge difference for others. Change the tone of the group, for good or for not.
Sometimes
Depending.
people is when they get there,
Yeah.
like, you get up and leave, but you just can't stand. And a lot of it is due to some of the dementia that they're going back. And they talk about the good old days, and it's like, oh, the bathroom outside, and it's like, oh, good old days.
That's what my grandma always said, the good old days. They weren't that good.
Kind of like the golden years are more like pewter.
Surprise. Oh. All right, so I think we've got the idea there with the beginning and the affirmation. Let's move to the middle section about mutual encouragement. His language, and I think it's verse 11, about longing to visit. I think Carrie's Bible even has that as the theme of the section. His language of longing to visit kind of strikes me in this COVID era. How about you? I don't know that I think I would have read right over that before the last year and a half that we've had. Because I'm not sure I really had, other than a few experiences of homesickness or, long distance relationships or that kind of thing. I can't say that I've really always experienced so much longing in my life, but I mean, certainly in the last year, I think we've become very familiar with that. And spiritual longing as a part of that. So Paul tells the Romans he brings spiritual gifts to share with them, to strengthen them. What is it?
Does yours say spiritual gifts?
Mine does. What does yours say?
Spiritual blessing.
Spiritual blessing.
So that, to me, spiritual gifts seems like a bit more broad than just a blessing.
Yeah. Like a category of something to do. Interesting. I don't know what Greek word there is. I should look. Kara said that, but I can't, sure.
And it's to make them strong, is what mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these Jews and Gentiles don't always get along. So I'm wondering about that. Like, was, they didn't exactly reconcile through his preaching. That's certainly not like in his lifetime, but I mean, he was working at that. And it comes up later in the passage, the mutual encouragement is not necessarily just because I like you and we have affinity. These are people with truly humongous differences in terms of attitudes, beliefs, outlooks, categories of a society, etc. But clearly the Romans have also influenced Paul's faith. He says that in verse 12, right? He's not even there. And he says that. Fascinating. Why might that be significant? What does that tell us about how the New Testament church works? Or I think the church universal today, probably. Does it work any different today?
Many members, it takes all of us and it's just not one person.
Right. And sometimes like we just had a study, for the last few weeks that was designed for a different congregation in a different part of the country. But it was a blessing to us to kind of visit their context and see, how they do teaching and, what they're talking about. And I think that dynamic is still at work today, isn't it?
I think that's part of the thing with the unchurched, the none, is they don't have the encouragement.
They haven't built it.
Yeah, from like that we get.
Woe is us for falling down on the job. Seriously. Life is far richer with those kinds of relationships, I think. Do other professions do that? Do those of you, because I only know ministry's my gig. And that's all we do. So like, if we don't know how to do something, or like, at least me, I'm like, who can I call? Who knows how to do that? Or who I know has done that. And, I get calls like that. I don't really know. I should be asking this, but I'm like, no, what do you need? That kind of thing. Do other people do that? Or is it all like, I have to figure this out on my own? Like maybe it's personality, I don't know. But in ministry, it's like, there's nothing original under the sun. So let's talk about it. And if it worked for you, maybe it'll work for us, or maybe I'll do it this way. Or do you do that? Good, I'm glad to hear that, because I really can't imagine if it were all up to me and my own.
But some people like that role to be like the teacher leader, and I think with Paul, he was right. From what I read, he's at the prime of his career and people could look to him as the one with all the answers, but he's kind of level setting that he's one of them. He's still
Yes.
learning
And communities, don't they teach us so much? I mean, like you said, what a mark of a true leader to say, I learn from you just as much as you might learn from me. I think there's some really key pieces of this that are still, like, it's important for us to identify that, because I do think they're in operation today. So what prevented Paul from seeing them in person? Verse 13. Is there any speculation in your study Bibles about that? He doesn't give the reasons. He just says he's been prevented or hasn't been able. I can't remember exactly how Keith's Bible phrased that, but
Something always kept me from doing so.
yes, something always kept. Gosh, those words could have come right out of my mouth.
So what's changed?
Right, procrastination or circumstance. I'm so busy.
Might have been in jail, Jeff.
He might have been in jail and the ship's schedule might not have cohered with his personal itinerary. You know, that's how he had to get everywhere. Can you imagine traversing the Mediterranean on those rickety boats? I think about the amount of travel that these New Testament Christians did, and I find it almost inconceivable. So we don't know, no speculation, no good guesses.
He had so much, it seemed like he had so much work to do that maybe some other things became the priority.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I don't know. I mean, he does eventually get to Rome, but you know, not as he's writing to them. He comes, you know, later. Verse 14 is an interesting verse. Maybe you had an emotional reaction when Kate read that, because she had civilized and savage as one of her categories, and I haven't heard that language in a long time. Mine says Greeks and barbarians, but barbarians is lowercase, so we don't insult people. But Greeks is uppercase. So that was not a slur, but barbarian kind of is. How do you read that? What's your take on verse 14? What is Paul trying to say?
He's stressing his, if there's a first inclusivity here.
So by naming these categories of people, at first read, we might think it's almost disrespectful, but it is actually, I think his goal, I think you're saying, Vern, his goal is the opposite of that, to be as inclusive as possible. Almost like, so these are traditional ways to categorize people, right, that he's using, but he's using it as a convention to say all. Right? That's how I read that verse. Any other thoughts on that?
The word may be a completely different. We look down on that.
Yes.
When we call somebody a barbarian, but it may have been more about the poor or unschooled.
Yes, it's civilized and savage idea, which operates probably in every society, right?
Because it also says the wise and the foolish.
Wise and the foolish, and he also uses Jews and Gentiles. So there's religious categories, there's social categories, potentially intellectual categories, or something of the like.
He called the barbarians unwise.
Yes, he calls them unwise. But he doesn't say they're excluded from the gospel message. And I think that's really important, you know, that lest we get too bogged down in the divisions. These are pretty revolutionary statements. So, you know, he could have written a letter that said, to the elite of Rome. And that would have been perfectly fine to do. And that's not what he's doing. Right? And he's very consistent throughout his letters on this very point of inclusion, which is often missed and misunderstood. In my opinion, he's the guy who writes in Galatians, neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. So he starts blowing up social categories and male and female. And people go, yeah, that's really nice. We're still gonna do it this way. Right? I mean, it's not, you know, he is poking at societal constructs in a huge way. Did you have something you wanted to
Well, I
share?
was gonna say that, you know, even when he mentions the unknown God, he has a way to change that around to tell what the unknown God is. He's using their thought.
Yeah, and so it's masterful in using the idiom of the people, and then just kind of like turning it a quarter turn, right? To get these worldviews they're not gonna completely align, right? But going to say God is a part of that too. And that's big stuff. I mean, I don't think we can underestimate those and let's face it, we could add many binary categories to this list, right? And then it would start to sound, well, I don't know if he's really saying that, right? It would start to stress us out. I don't think too many of us are stressed about Greeks and barbarians today. But if we added some categories that we do talk about in there, then it would start to feel like, oh, I don't know. So he says, Paul says, I think he's saying that he learns the depth of the gospel through his interactions with all of these diverse people, right? That's sort of the idea here. So he's a debtor, right, to these people who have shown him their way of life. How did he do that? Did he observe their actions and their devotion and their faith? And does he want his life to be like theirs? I mean, how does faith get deepened in that way? Or transmitted?
He just got right in there with them.
Yeah. In Philippians, he writes about whatever you have heard and heard and received or learned and seen in me, put it into practice. I mean, that's he's seeing like the full benefit of both learning from others and then others learning from him, right? Like that mutuality is critical to
Yeah, and someplace
Life.
else he says, I become all things to all people.
Yeah.
Sounds to me like he's writing this from Corinth.
He is.
He is?
He is.
Okay, so then if we remember our lesson from the Corinthians, that was a diverse mess.
Absolutely. let me plop down in Las Vegas and
Yeah.
meet you.
And not ever indicate that I'm so much smarter and brighter and know more and.
Yeah, he would never do that.
Yeah, right, he would never do that.
So I wonder about this piece of the mutuality and if there's really any other way to transmit faith. I wrestle with that a little bit as, church communities. Because I see this tension and they're both they're sides of this, they're two sides of the same coin, but they're different approaches. And so, like I think about programs that are like for groups of, like Bible study, right? But there's always an informal piece to our Bible study, right? And there's talk before and after, that's more one-to-one or small groups, like, it can't just be, we speak at the Bible study and then we, in a big group of 24, 28 online, and then we leave, right? There's still that one-on-one. So church communities do like formal things, like programs, like worship, education. But then there's that other piece of journeying with each other that is more individualized. And that's, to me, I guess I will posit, that is how faith is transmitted. Right, one to another. Is there any other method? I don't know. I mean, I guess I haven't found any. Have you? I mean, I suppose there's always that one person who said, I read the New Testament start to finish, the book dropped out of the sky and I became a believer. And I'm thinking, that's rare. All right, let's get to the core of the gospel, verses 16 and 17. These final two verses, probably I think most scholars, if they analyze the book for like content, would say this is the theme of the whole letter. These are the verses that launched Martin Luther's understanding of grace. Verse 16 is a great memory verse, at least the first half or so. And then verse 17 is actually a quotation. And where is that quotation from?
I have a note here that says Habakkuk.
Yeah, Habakkuk. Good old Habakkuk that we never read except maybe this verse, right? One of the minor prophets of the Old Testament. The book is about faith during impending challenge, of course. All the prophecy books are, you could say, are about that. But what is the message that Paul is trying to give? What is the quote saying?
So is he saying is Habakkuk in the Old Testament saying shall live, meaning live, not just live now, but live forever?
Oh, great question.
Or
I'd have
just
to read,
live
I'd have to
now
read
good?
all of chapter 2 to see and put it in context, to show Paul's proof texting here, so he's plucking a verse, so we'd have to look to see. I think the idea that he is capturing, or the thought behind Paul utilizing it here is about this idea of righteousness and how one is made right with God. And so it's not action, but hey, belief.
Is he going back to Abraham?
He will. We'll do that next week. He will. He will absolutely link the traditions together. And talk about the righteous will live by faith. Like I said, Luther, this is Luther's like moment where he realizes that that's the key to everything, or he feels that's the key to everything scripturally, as he's like using a lens through which to interpret scripture. His commentary in the book of Romans, Luther's commentary in the book of Romans is what John Wesley read, that he felt his heart strangely warmed. I don't know if you knew that, and which, founder of Methodism. So like there is this piece, I think, about the righteous person lives by confident hope, or confidence in God's trustworthiness, not one's own trustworthiness, right? This again is like a theological reorientation. So it's not necessarily about what you do. But Paul uses the word power in verse 16. Rome appreciates power. Rome is, the place that has the military that has conquered every other people it ever tried to conquer. Their literature, their art, we still read and utilize it today. They had a transportation system unlike any other known in the world. So when Paul starts writing things like what does it say? The power of God for salvation, right? Believers' ears in Rome are probably going to perk up a little bit because power is critical, and he's talking about power that will change and sustain their life. But
Completely different kind of power.
it's completely different kind of power, but these are people who like the idea of power. So if you say now Jesus is the power, right? It's a paradox, but it's something they can relate to, hang on to, understand. Of course the empire does get that wrong, right? I mean, later on they use Christianity as part of the conquering, right? So I mean, these words get twisted too, I think, but the essence of them, this idea that it was meant to encourage people who were a minority in their setting, right? He's trying to remind them of where the power comes from.
You have a marketing person, you figured that all out by himself.
No
Snake those
social
people.
media focus group. No, none of that.
And like almost political, I hope this doesn't sound so negative, but I couldn't help but think, maybe others too, like political people say things like this to try to snag people and get them on their side, and they use the right words.
Yes.
I'm trying not to have that slip into my mind, but I with.
I understand what you're saying about like, we should all be on guard for manipulation, right? And Paul is definitely doing that, right? But the idea is that it would be for a greater purpose. Not necessarily his own. So that's where I think you have to like, you'd be testing then at that point to say, okay, then what are the implications of what you're saying? And if it all comes back to you and you gaining prestige, well, there's a big, this is always my question for the televangelist, you know what I mean?
Well, and then the word righteous.
God does not need a jet,
Right,
so why do you
yeah.
need it?
right, or a custodian on the fault. But the term righteous now, current state, it has a negative connotation to me because I think of, people have been self-righteous and,
Yes.
be here.
The far right.
Yes. I
Well,
know.
and great point, because I think scripture hits me differently every time I read it, depending on my state of mind. And then, like you said, there are these cultural factors that then make us able either to hear things or maybe less able to hear things depending on the state. So, I mean, this is why we have Bible study, right? I mean, we probably read Romans 1 before too, but we read it differently then than we are right now. All right, well, we have to wrap up here, but I wanted us to use our fingers for a poll. So you guys, and how are you guys doing on the Zoom? Doing okay? Any questions or comments you'd like to make?
Good.
You're good? Okay. So you
No,
can, if
just
you want
fun
to
to
put,
hear y'all.
oh, good. We're gonna keep going for just a couple minutes if you want to stick around. And we're gonna do a poll. So here is the question I have for you. It's silent poll, scale of 0 to 10. So 0 would be like this, right? 10 would be all 10 fingers or somewhere in between. And 0 is not at all. 10 would be absolutely essential, or whatever combination of fingers you pick. How inspirational to you is being present with other believers? Not at all, absolutely essential.
My eyes swollen shut.
Do you want me to repeat it? How is inspirational to you is being present with other believers? Oh, there's a lot of fingers out. Yeah,
10.
10, just about. Depends on the day. I see wiggling fingers. Do you think all the individuals in your church community feel the same way you do?
No, because I've heard some people say they still have not come to church because watching church from home is so much more convenient.
So
I've heard that
the
from-
inspiration is not necessarily found in the presence of others, and that's hard for you to understand, because you got
It is, yeah, but they said this is, I'm not distracted by kids or anything else. I'm just sitting there for the service.
Yeah. Has there ever been a situation where another person's faith story helped you better see God's action in your life?
You hear about people talking about traumatic experiences and then come out of that thinking that God intended something, and that happens 20 years later when that realization comes to them.
They tell that story, and then there's meaning
And the possible
purpose.
is you're made aware of.
I think we're living in one of those times right now. Do you sense that? I mean, as a group. So like I was talking to my aunt, because I saw some family, and I was talking to my aunt, and I said this to Paul too. And they took it as like, oh, but I'm like, I just think that's the way it is. I said, I thought COVID would define like a couple of years of ministry. And now I think it will define the rest of my ministry. Not like acutely, right? Like we will be, but I'm talking about the after effects of what we have been through. Societally speaking, will be with us for the rest of our lifetimes, you guys. I really believe that. And And so, you know, we can't rush the meaning that we make either. We are living, it will only be a looking back, you know, but I had to make peace with that realization myself to say, you know, this isn't going away. I mean, we all know that it's not going away. I'm not just talking about the disease, though. I'm talking about what it's revealed about our society, how we have changed, what our government is doing, what we as individuals feel and believe, and what our church community is gonna look like.
Well, and the kids,
Absolutely.
how defining is that for them?
Oh, I don't even think we can be articulate about it yet. You know, I ask these questions and I start to try to do that, and then I realize it's too soon. People are not ready. I'm not ready. I don't know what I have to say about it yet either. You feel that way too?
Yeah. My daughter and I were talking about what images of this COVID thing will we be seeing 10 years from now? You know, when the towers went down. So 10 years from now, what images will we be seeing in media or elsewhere, or artists from this?
I wonder. So I have a little thing I want to read to you. I know we're going over, but I want to read this to you. So we're using a what's the book? Did I grab them all? Oh, it's over here. So I have two books that are kind of like it gives me the theme. So there's a story. In the midst of the COVID-19 precautions, the congregations of Dunlap, Iowa, who my friend used to serve, canceled their long practiced fall dinners, which had been in times of fellowship across denominations and of fundraising for special missions. This was particularly difficult because the community had experienced limited contact with each other for months. Already graduation celebrations and VBS, July parades and congregational picnics had been canceled, rally days, backpack blessings, and the much loved traditions of the beginning of school had been eliminated. The spring first communion celebration had been postponed and still hadn't happened. Does that sound familiar? Like Paul and the Roman believers, the people of the faith communities longed to be together, to share, to talk, to care for one another. St. John Lutheran carefully considered the risks, studied the recommended protocols from denominational and federal groups, and figured out a way to safely keep the fall dinner tradition alive, but in a different day. One Sunday in October, while it was still warm, they set up tables beside the church building, hired an on-site caterer, and put together to-go meals. Mass people from Dunlap and the nearby communities lined up in cars and pickups to drive through the parking lot and get carefully packed box dinners from gloved, masked, and sanitized Lutherans. This is hilarious. Okay, Catholics and Methodists and Assembly of God members joined the spiritual but not religious population for a brief encounter over 2 hours that afternoon. The eyes of drivers and passengers and servers all evidenced the mask-covered smiles of joy as everyone relished this brief moment of remembered community and celebrated lifelong sharing of faith. Phone conversations resumed with increased frequency in the coming days. The leaders of the other churches and towns commented on how important this experience was and how it boosted the spirit of those in their churches. They also recognized the adherence to recommended practices at that stage of the pandemic. This is like a little essay, sharing our faith happens more in everyday settings than in big organized events. The conversations over coffee and pie build relationships, trust develops, and weaknesses can be shared. And that's the time when faith experiences go back and forth between people. Our stories of God's power in our lives, even in the small things, open eyes and hearts to the presence of that same power in the lives of our friends and loved ones. And their stories bless us. That's the power of the gospel. When physically gathering as church is limited or individuals are isolated by circumstances, it is vital that we find ways to connect with and to encourage each other. A simple conversation becomes a cup of cold water that refreshes and renews all involved. What do you think? So here are the questions that I raised at the beginning that I'm now going to share as statements. The power of God is active and effective among the community of believers. It is active and effective among us. We join in praying for the salvation of the world. We believe it is possible. We have confident hope. Final thoughts?
I think in our small community, we are very lucky that we interact with people in our faith community regularly. I think we get to have those extended conversations that, like I look at my sister in her church that's not in her community. They don't interact with them outside of their church day, on a Sunday morning. That might be the only interaction they have. And so I think her faith community with her kids and stuff is different than mine in my experience.
For sure. And then I will say the power of your example within the community is different too, right? People know you as in many roles. They see you lots of different places and they know faith is a part of that. And that, I don't think we always can put into words what that means when we know we have friends in all of those places and fellow believers. I think it's really powerful. Did you have something you wanted to share with me?
Well, Jesus says, "For 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there also." So that's important.
We better trust it, huh? Lean into it a little more. The power of the gospel, like you actually have it. Okay, our closing prayer is Psalm 9, and you can certainly stay and visit if you want. So let's pray. I will give thanks to you, Lord, with my whole heart. I will tell of all of your wonderful deeds. I will be glad and exult in you today. I will sing praise to your name, our Lord, Most High. All right, next week, August 10th, the faith of ancestors. It will be Romans 4. We'll be looking at kind of the difference between faith and works in Abraham and Sarah's life, and how we have a pattern of relationship with God for that, and how that can inform us in the 21st century. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah, have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, everybody think about those
So-